The China-Africa Investment Forum has come to close with calls for a more strategic partnership between China and economies on the continent. Now, while appreciating the funding support provided by China, African firms are also calling for it to be diversified. The continent wants China to explore alternative forms of funding to mitigate the risk of relying entirely on one financier. Mwongeli filed this report.
Day two of the forum has seen deliberations switch to funding of projects where participants here debated on the best and most effective financial tools that will serve both China and Africa. African companies are proposing other options like grants, equity funds, and also private-public partnership as a more sustainable way of funding projects. Also, African companies have urged Chinese firms to invest more in private firms. Now, other areas of deliberations included infrastructure, where they were looking at how China can play a bigger role in reducing the infrastructure gap in Africa.
Yeah, there are several ways China can assist development of infrastructure in Africa in many different angles in terms of technology development, education development, etc. Part of it is private-public partnership. Chinese firms, many of which are backed by government, can form partnership with either private companies that are developing projects in Africa or governments or African governments that are developing projects in a number of sectors. But I think the high growth areas are technology. Technology is very hot in the market.
Debates also focused on shared growth, where there were discussions on how reinforcing ties between China, Africa and Europe can help Chinese-Africa ties. Also, renewable energy was a key issue on the agenda.
I think by far the capacity of renewable energy in Africa is not very big. But in the future, I think it's a very developing area in the world. And as a renewable energy company, and we are the world's largest mono-silicon company. And I think we will invest many renewable projects in the Africa. And our company also think that Africa maybe becomes the world's largest renewable energy area in the world.
Heads of Africa private and public companies also got an opportunity to pitch their projects to over 150 Chinese investors present, all in a bid to ensure that they can form a more solid partnership. Mwongeli, CGTN in Marrakesh, Morocco.
In fact, let's head over to Marrakesh right now to dig into this story in a little more detail. Yao Owusu is the Managing Director of Gateway Innovations, who joined us now live from the Moroccan city. Thank you for your time this evening, sir. From your perspective, what is the most pressing skills gap, especially in tech, for sub-Saharan economies, and does it vary from region to region?
Oh, okay. Yes, the skills gap are mostly in software development and management, actually, higher level management. Companies across Africa in the technology space are finding it difficult to find Africans with, quality software programming and software development skills, as well as, high level management skills. So that is, but that is being addressed, though. As you know, there's a proliferation of business schools, business and innovation schools across the continent of Africa. For instance, in Ghana, until just about 25 years ago, there were only 3 universities, government-funded universities. Now there are more than 75 universities across, the nation, and many of them offer primarily, targeted programs in innovation and business, basically to address that skill gap, or that it's a business opportunity, and so companies are actually jumping in, not just Ghana but across the continent.
Right. At conferences like this, though, there's always a lot of talk about tech transfer, skill transfer, but are there actual examples of African countries, African cities, African governments that are actually making this happen?
Yeah, I think as far as sub-Saharan Africa goes, Kenya and South Africa are basically in the lead. More specifically, Nairobi Johannesburg and Cape Town are the leaders. And then Lagos and Accra are basically also competing. I spoke at an event in Marrakesh only in the last 30 minutes, and I mentioned that in Africa, about as much as about 75% or more of the population are unbanked or do not have access to traditional banking. But through M-Pesa and other mobile payment or mobile banking innovations in places like Kenya and East Africa, as much as about up to 8 out of 10 of the population now have access to banking through these mobile banking innovations. And so, yes, and so things are changing in some of these dynamic cities, such as Nairobi, as I mentioned, Cape Town. And then in Accra, which is where M-Pedigree was launched. M-Pedigree, it's a very simple but very consequential innovation that is helping to weed out fake medications in the African market. According to studies, this M-Pedigree innovation can potentially save about 700,000 lives because up to about 30% of medications in the African market are fake, are not real medication. And so what the M-Pedigree innovation does is that through a user's mobile handset, when a person goes to buy medication at the pharmacy or any place, the M-Pedigree innovation helps the person to identify through a serial number on the products, whether the medication is fake or not. And so that is also changing the way business is done. And then there's also Andela.
Yeah.
It's a software development training company based in Lagos, which has recently attracted tens of millions of dollars from Silicon Valley. And yeah, so these are examples of African innovations that are changing the technology ecosystem on the continent.
Right, let's talk about something you've paid quite a bit of attention to, developing smart cities. Not many sub-Saharan governments are making their citizens' lives a lot easier, especially in terms of delivery of public services through smarter, freely accessible tech, even though we have promising ideas like blockchain, for example, available these days. What's the problem there? What are the obstacles to developing truly smart cities in Africa?
Okay, I mean, the challenges, if I heard you correctly, the challenges for developing smart cities across the continent is one, it's a very, very capital-intensive initiative. For instance, in Kenya, the Konza city, which is basically a smart city, the budget for that is $10 billion. That is massive. And so what you find is that across the continent, almost all the major African economies have a technology park or smart city initiative on the drawing board. There is the Abuja Technology Village in Nigeria. There is Ghana Cyber City in Ghana. There's one in Diamanjo in Senegal, etc. But what you find is that all these are government initiatives, except two that I know of, which is the Ghana Cyber City in Ghana and the Silicon Park Africa, which is being developed by a number of young South Africans in the Eastern Cape. Very, very exciting project. They are also building a technology university as part of that initiative. And then, yeah, and so those are the two. All the rest, Ghana Cyber City and Silicon Park Africa, all the rest are government initiatives because because it takes so much money to develop a technology park. The Ghana Cyber City one is $200 million, which is relatively manageable, for a private company, the company behind it, which is the Gateway Innovations, and their partners, such as Exalis, which is actually a company I used to work for in the United States. But the rest are much bigger. The government of Ghana actually has its own competing sort of venture in that space. But anyway, so one hurdle is that finance. And then there's also, in addition to finance, there's also, let's take a country like Lagos. I think there's more, the oil economy is too dominant in Nigeria. And so there's just too much emphasis on, the banks and wealthy people in Nigeria putting in money for offshore drilling and things like that. And so there's just not enough focus in other areas of the economy in a given African country. That is also one of the challenges for developing a smart city.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your content, your input, of course, on the program. You're also there, Managing Director of Gateway Innovations. You're speaking to us live there from the Moroccan city of Marrakesh.